Hey. Okay, this is less than ideal, but here's a lecture to go with your notes for 6.3, which is all about your immune system. You can see I'm in my closet. It's a nice scenic spot, and got my my coffee, and I'm using a terrible program to make this recording, and I'm sorry if there are problems, but I'm trying my best. So off we go. Immune system, defense against infectious disease. We're going to start right here by quickly defining what is called your innate immune system. Basically, we have two parts of the immune system. There's the sort of general barriers, and then there's the specific immunity. So we're going to start with the more basic one, the innate immunity. It's also called your non-specific immunity. So we're talking about like physical barriers here to prevent entry of any pathogen. So we're not specifically targeting chickenpox or coronavirus. This is just like nobody can come in through these barriers, right? So of course, the first layer of defense is your skin. And so the skin is the physical barrier to prevent entry of pathogens. And that word pathogen is important. So a pathogen is any biological agent that could cause illness or disease. So normally we're talking bacteria, we're talking viruses, we're talking fungi, but technically that could also mean parasites. So those are pathogens. Oh, by the way, it's a video, so I'm going to go fast, and you pause and revisit and finish your notes as needed, and then we'll just keep going. All right, off we go. So, on your skin, there are special adaptations, including little. How do I get myself? This is so stupid. Including little glands called sebaceous glands. I want to do that again. Let's do this again. Let's go. And the sebaceous glands are making this waxy gunk called sebum. That's kind of what makes your skin, greasy. But of course, that sebum is good. It's supposed to protect you from infection. There, that ew. So that sebum is the waxy secretion that gives the greasiness to your skin. It's in all of your hair cells. There's a sebaceous gland, and that gives you a little extra, just slightly acidic layer to prevent bacterial growth and therefore prevent infection. So every time you suck all that grease off your face, you're also taking that protective layer with it, which ironically makes your skin more likely to become infected and therefore makes your more likely to develop acne as a result. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Anyway, sebum, waxy gunk, prevent infection on your skin. Next, in your skin, there are various openings. We call these openings an orifice. So your mouth, your nose, your eyes, anus, genitals have openings as well, and all of those would be called an orifice. At each opening, you're going to need some extra protection. And so the tissues at each orifice have a special layer called a mucous membrane. And so here's an example of a mucous membrane, the most obvious one with the name mucus. It's in your nose. And so that helps to produce this mucus to trap pathogens. The mucus also has a special enzyme called lysozyme, which can bust up bacteria. So a special antibacterial enzyme called lysozyme plus the gunk in your mucus helps to fight off infection. And then, sorry, this is a little gross, but maybe you have post-nasal drip. So that mucus then goes down the back of your throat, all thanks to cilia, right? So we've got these cilia, which rush the mucus down your throat like a river of slime, all heading down your esophagus, not the trachea, hopefully, down the esophagus toward the stomach with a pH of around 2 to then blast those bacteria with acid and they die. So this is designed to get that mucus down into your stomach where the bacteria cannot survive. So, mucus, yay, thanks mucus. Of course, if you have allergies, that's an overproduction of mucus, and that's not fun. But normally it's there to help sweep the little microbes away and get down to your gut. Now, this part gets a little bit detailed, so we're going to hang out here for a little while. The next thing we have to discuss is if that first barrier, that skin, gets damaged, or more specifically, if the blood vessels within your skin or any blood vessels get damaged, you get a little hole in your blood vessel, and you have to plug that hole with what's called a blood clot. A blood clot, we usually use the word clot if it's inside your body, and then, of course, if that clot is outside your body, it will harden into a scab, but it's the same stuff no matter what. So let's talk about what happens when a blood clot forms. This is a blood clot right here. Here's how it works. First thing you need to know is that your blood vessels have all kinds of stuff flowing through them. You got your white blood cells, your red blood cells, you got your proteins, your lipoprotein complexes transporting fats, lipids. We talked about that a long time ago that help your blood clot. So what happens is when you damage a blood vessel, these little dudes, the platelets, will then bind to that area where there is damage. And so this damage to your blood vessel, you've hurt yourself, it exposes little fibers that are normally covered up in the arterial walls or the venous walls. And so now those little proteins are exposed. The platelets grab on and they become activated. So these activated platelets are then going to release chemicals that we call clotting factors. And those clotting factors will then activate other platelets to then come to the same area. So they start to have this little platelet party, and then they release more clotting factors, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And that's an example of what we call positive feedback, where more platelets get activated, then release clotting factors, and then activate more platelets to release more clotting factors, and it builds and builds and builds. Now, don't freak out, but there are tons of different clotting factors. And if you go on to study medicine later, you'll learn them all, and they're not that bad. But IB needs you to know exactly 4. So I would recommend pausing my video and sketching this out. And then we'll come back to it. So here are the 4 clotting factors that you need to know. Pause me whenever you need. Prothrombin, thrombin, fibrinogen, and fibrin. We're going to go through how all of this comes together, but I think it's nice to have a little sketch before we start. Moving on. So the first thing you need to know is that always in your bloodstream, there is this stuff called prothrombin. And this prothrombin is like an inactive version of thrombin. And that inactive version, the word for that is a zymogen. And so this zymogen is basically it's like an inactive or precursor to the more active enzyme. So prothrombin is the zymogen, the inactive version that then becomes thrombin. And this is always there. The prothrombin's always there. The difference is that when it's time to make a clot, that prothrombin gets activated, turns into thrombin. Okay, so that's what we're going to pick up now, getting back to some more helpful visuals. Off we go. So back to these activated platelets calling on their friends with clotting factors to come in here. What they're going to do is they're going to start to build and build and build, and then they sort of collect, and they're all going to release these clotting factors. And what those clotting factors do is they make that first important conversion happen. So this prothrombin quickly gets converted into the active version over here on the right called thrombin. So this happens really quickly because of that platelet party that's going on, and all these platelets are then activating the thrombin, and so we get what's called the thrombin burst, where thrombin hugely spikes in your blood, and that's going to lead to clot formation. So prothrombin is now activated as thrombin. Then what that does is the thrombin helps to convert this fibrinogen. And fibrinogen is dissolved into your plasma. It's soluble, and so it's there in your bloodstream, not doing anything. But when thrombin is activated, it takes that soluble fibrinogen, which is what we see here, and thrombin then links them together into an insoluble compound called fibrin. It's the same stuff, but it's been modified by thrombin to make it insoluble, precipitate as a solid, and then link together in these huge strands that make like a web. And so this fibrin starts to make long web-like strands, and then boom, we start to get this mesh that you see here. So prothrombin gets activated to thrombin, which then takes the fibrinogen and then turns that into fibrin, which forms huge strands, making a big old net that catches all the blood cells and the gooey stuff and clumps it together, and that is what makes our clot. Now, too fast. Okay, so that's the whole story. So you go back to your little flow chart. We have damage to the vessel. The platelets get activated. They turn our prothrombin into thrombin. which importantly takes our fibrinogen, turns it into fibrin, which makes mesh threads, and then that catches all the blood cells that are floating around and makes a big gooey mess that we call a blood clot. And if that's outside your body, that gunk hardens into a scab, and if it's inside your body, it's a nice gooey blood clot that stops the bleeding and lets your arteries, repair themselves. So that's blood clotting. Not too bad. As I said, this video production app or software sucks. I can only take about 10 minutes at a time. So what I'm going to do is talk about bad blood clots, then stop this video, and we'll have to pick up with video number 2 after that. So as you can assume, blood clots can form too frequently, and they can start floating around in your blood supply. Remember, there's an increased risk of this if you have hypertension or high blood pressure. And so that high blood pressure increases your risk of blood clots. And those blood clots, maybe they don't break down quickly enough, and they can get stuck somewhere super sensitive, such as the coronary arteries, causing heart attack, or in the brain, causing a stroke. And we've already talked about that, but it shows up again in this unit, so there we are. Okay, so take a second. You ignore me and see if you can answer this exam question. And I'm just going to give you a second to pause it. Okay, and then so of course now we look at W, X, Y, and Z. We were looking at prothrombin, thrombin, fibrinogen, and fibrin. Not too bad. This is a real exam question. Okay, more on innate immunity. So a little bit more to do here. You also, in addition to your skin, if some bad dudes, some pathogens get in, we have special cells that are just looking for any outsider. We call these phagocytes. This is a non-specific immune response because they're gonna go in and they're gonna attack anybody who shouldn't be inside your body. They're gonna get gobbled up by phagocytes. So here's a nice phagocyte munching on some bacteria. Yum, 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 yum. Phagocytes, non-specific. This part's heavy. This is what's called inflammation, or the inflammatory response. It's pretty basic, but a lot of vocab. So let's say you get a splinter. That splinter will have bacteria on it. Those could get you. Those could be bad guys, right? So what we want to do is increase blood flow, thereby increasing the phagocytes that could go gobble up those bad guys. So we increase blood flow by what's called inflammation. And when inflammation happens, special cells called mast cells will release a chemical called histamine. Perhaps you've heard of an antihistamine. Well, your body is making histamine, which then increases blood flow and increases permeability. So you get swelling, you get redness, you get heat, and you get more white blood cells here. So your body responds to some sort of scratch or puncture or sometimes even pollen with inflammation. And then your mast cells release histamine and your body kind of freaks out. Blood flow increases, which brings more white blood cells to the area of potential infection. So that's good. But if you have allergies, you have an overproduction of histamine, therefore an overproduction of this inflammatory response. Not ideal. So everything you need to know for this little section is in this slide, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I recommend sketching it if you want, or at the very least, just writing out what's happening at steps 1 through 5 here. And since it's all written out here, and I've briefly explained it, I'm going to end this video right here, because after this, we move into your specific immune response. So go back and rewatch anything that you missed, prepare questions to ask me when I get back next week. And this is now the end of video 1. Of course, now you have to watch me try and end the video. It's like your parents trying to hang up on FaceTime, it's kind of embarrassing. Here I go. Trying to hang up still. Can't end the call. I'm trying. Here we go.